Hi guys.
Hello and welcome to this discussion on cybercrime. Thanks to Brad and the other panelists for an interesting discussion on corporate identity. So now we shift a little bit towards some of the big themes that we're seeing in the financial crime and fraud space at the moment. Addressing some of the themes on cybercrime. I'm very happy to have the speakers that we have today. Let me go on and introduce them. First, we have Mohammed Zabri Adil Talib, head of a digital forensics department at Cybersecurity Malaysia, which is part of the Ministry of Communications, a government agency in Malaysia. So Zabri is charged with ensuring the efficient operations of Cybersecurity Malaysia's digital forensics and cyber defense services. He has extensive experience handling cybercrime investigations and forensic examinations for various law enforcement agencies in Malaysia, as well as the central bank. Welcome, Zabri.
Hi, welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Manesh, for inviting me here. And I'm glad to share the stage with other experts. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Zabri. Next, we have Ray Irving, Managing Director for Global Business at FS-ISAC, the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. So this is the only global cyber intelligence sharing community solely focused on financial services. It serves financial institutions and in turn their customers. And of course, FS-ISAC leverages its intelligence platform, resiliency resources, and sort of a trusted peer-to-peer network of experts to try to anticipate, mitigate, and respond to cyber threats. Interested to hear more about this in the discussion. I know the members of FS-ISAC represent over $35 trillion in assets under management in more than 70 countries. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you as well. We also have Joshua Fu, the Regional Director for ASEAN at Chainalysis, which helps law enforcement, government agencies, crypto exchanges, financial institutions, and cybersecurity firms with monitoring, risk management, and investigations in the crypto space, including to help solve some of the worst of the world's worst and highest profile cyber cases. So Joshua, I know, previously managed infrastructure and security teams for the Singapore government and has also worked with several notable cybersecurity firms, including FireEye, RSA, and Carbon Black. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you, Manesh. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And finally, we have Guy Sheppard, head of Asia Pacific Financial Crime, Intelligence, and Cyber for SWIFT. So Guy joined SWIFT in 2014 and has regular engagement with the regulatory and banking communities to raise awareness and drive take-up of better information sharing and analytics practices in financial crime, fraud, and cyber defense programs, specifically at financial institutions. And I know for you, Guy, cyber has become a particular area of focus and personal interest, it appears, in the last 3 years. Not only for you personally, but also for SWIFT, I suppose. Sure. Welcome, Guy.
Thanks, Manesh, and to echo everyone else, it's always great to be here with you guys at Regulation Asia.
Thanks very much, and for all the support over the years. Sure. And in fact, Guy, given your focus on cyber and fraud, I would like to ask you to kick things off by sort of giving our listeners a broader view of the cybercrime landscape, perhaps from a global perspective. Sure. Essentially, what have you seen in the last 12 months? What do you expect to see moving forward?
Yeah, okay. Well, hello, everybody. I think the executive summary is it's going to be kind of more and more of the same, I think, is the trend that we're seeing. I think if anyone Googles fraud or cyber and growth, you get some really scary figures, regardless of the specific vertical. But to kind of try and paint a global picture, I guess, to frame our conversation, I think according to some of the research that I found, globally, I think we're looking at about $600 billion plus in terms of cyber damages. So that's about 1 to 1.5 of global GDP. I think why this is very relevant for all of us and our listeners in Asia is that Asia Pacific has got an exponentially unfairly large share of this, if you like, at about 33%. And I've had that quoted as much as 7% of Asia Pac's GDP from these kind of cybercrime losses. And I know there's been sort of previous conversations, and you have it on the docket around, the convergence of fraud and AML and other aspects like, sort of different responses to this. But I think some stats that I always kind of quote that I think are quite relevant is particularly with COVID, Kaspersky in their research shared that 73% of workers that have been working from home due to movement control orders, circuit breakers, lockdowns, whatever it may be, even though they are prone to much higher risk, they've received no additional kind of cyber training. I think Kaspersky back in 1990 used to get sort of one malware variant a day, they would record it. And now it's kind of closer to 320,000. One an hour. Now it's 320,000 a day. I think the World Health Organization talked about a 5-fold increase in the number of attacks that they themselves have been subject to. And our friends at Forrester describe a 600% quarter-to-quarter increase, specifically in terms of spear phishing emails as a primary route of ingress into different institutions. And I think if we look at this from more of a SWIFT perspective, certainly in terms of the SWIFT member bank hacks, 83% of the beneficiary accounts are actually based in Southeast Asia. And we've seen a decrease in terms of the average value of a fraudulent message, down from about 5.3 million US dollars to now less than $1 million, and a lower number of fraudulent message injections per attack, which, if you follow kind of simple supply and demand, means they're doing more of this. So I think that's really where we are.
Thank you, Guy. I think that sort of gives us a fairly scary picture of the cybercrime landscape.
Very scary space, Manesh.
Yeah, it is. Ray, I know FS-ISAC, given you facilitate information sharing for the financial sector, and kind of, I think our listeners will be largely financial institutions. Could you share a little bit with us about some of the threat intelligence you've been seeing? What are the main threats you've seen reported in the last 12 months? Anything specific to Asia Pacific you'd like to share?
Sure. So our members, they share what they're seeing in terms of threats, and we aggregate that and analyze that. So I can talk a little bit about what we've been seeing. And in terms of specific to Asia Pacific, I don't think we're seeing anything particularly specific in the sense that all of the threats are global. We're seeing the largest threats currently are ransomware, phishing, and supply chain attacks. So I'll talk a little bit about those. The other important thing is the context, which of course is the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, we were already in a situation before COVID where the financial services sector was busy digitizing and innovating. We saw a lot of startup firms, a lot of new technologies coming like crypto, and we saw a steady move towards electronic banking, electronic transactions, mobile banking, mobile applications, and so on. And the pandemic accelerated that. So financial firms had to move quickly because customers who were not previously using digital platforms suddenly found that they had to use digital platforms in order to be able to transact during the pandemic. And also, of course, the same financial firms had to support remote workforces for the first time, as did a lot of other sectors as well. So ransomware, we saw a lot of innovation in 2020. The threat actors switched to a sort of double tap approach where they would threaten to name and shame victims. They would threaten to release confidential data, as well as simply encrypting all your data and asking for you to pay a ransom in order for them to give you the decryption key. So that was all quite bad news for victim firms. There was some good news. FS-ISAC and its members managed to collaborate with Microsoft to disrupt the TrickBot network, for example. Then on the credential theft and phishing side of things, we saw a lot of COVID-themed phishing where threat actors would take advantage of the pandemic to basically play on people's discombobulation, if you like, by the change of situation and really trying to exploit that. But underneath that new COVID skin, it was pretty much the same old tactics as we've been seeing for years. Distributed denial of service attacks were a big thing. We had a campaign last year which threatened which impacted over almost 100 financial services firms. Probably the most public one was the New Zealand Stock Exchange being offline for a while. And that was a global campaign. FS-ISAC as a global information sharing group, we were bringing together members from all over the world and getting them together so that they could collaborate and share best practices and experiences as that campaign raged. So that was a great case study for the value that an organization and membership of an organization like FS-ISAC can bring to firms. And then third-party compromise. We had some very big third-party breaches. We had SolarWinds, Excellion, which is basically where a trusted software provider that a lot of companies use has been compromised. So by installing that trusted provider's software in your network, you're effectively compromising yourself. So that's been a big issue, and that's really highlighted third-party supply chain risk.
Thank you. I think that again adds to the scary picture. Zabri, could you share a bit from the Malaysian perspective? What sort of cases are you being sort of asked to come in and investigate? And I suppose adding on to that, how do you actually resolve these cases?
Okay, Cybersecurity Malaysia is not a law enforcement agency. We are the National Reference Center for anything related to cybersecurity, which means that we are something like specialized hospital in terms of digital forensics and cybersecurity, because law enforcement, they also have their own forensics capability and cybersecurity capability. But if for cases that they couldn't resolve, they will refer to us. For example, in malware-related cases, we can see that involving cases like Macau scam, loan sharking cases whereby the criminal asks the victims to download APK files, and then from these APK files they can take a lot of information, like intimate photos, mobile phones, friend lists, so that if something happens, so they will try to shame the victim, like Ray said. Of course, in order to conduct this type of analysis, we have to conduct static analysis, dynamic analysis, and also we have to do the reverse engineering in order to understand how the mobile apps, APK files works. And other than malware, we're also facing ransomware cases. We receive a lot of ransomware cases involving Sodino Kibi and BitLocker type of ransomware, which is they cause a lot of damage. They disrupted the company's big organizations operations. But we can see the trend that the organization try to bring up, revive their operating system. Unfortunately, there's nothing much you can do about it. But at the same time, they are destroying the evidence. So we couldn't get the full picture of the attack of ransomware. Only a small fraction of it. That's related to ransomware. And then we also see a lot of trend in the cases related to digital assets, Ponzi scheme, fraud cases involving cryptocurrency, whereby this is most of the cases are referred to us by the Royal Malaysia Police as from their commercial crime department as in similar like fraud case, but this is involving cryptocurrency. We also assisted security commissions, in combating the illegal digital asset custodian, illegal exchanges Yeah, and also we also help the National Anti-Financial Crime Center to establishing the SOP for them to combat this properly. And most of the cases, you can see that because of the pandemic COVID, because the economy is not good, we can see that the spike, all related to these cases are, related to monetary cases. Yeah, that's all. I can give you some perspective from Malaysia.
No, yeah, that's really interesting. I was wondering, I know that sort of ransomware, and sort of digital extortion type cases have become quite prominent in the cybercrime landscape. Can I ask you, Zabri, what are some of the challenges you've come across when trying to investigate cases like this? Particularly because they involve cryptocurrency, digital assets, so that must add some complexity, right?
Yeah. It being in a digital forensics department, we have to conduct the analysis based on scientifically methods that's already proven, so that it can be accepted by the court. When involving the challenges, of course, when related to cryptocurrency and digital asset, this is a new technology, and new technology involving new modus operandi. This is the types of new crime whereby we need to study more to keep up to date with the technology. So basically, the main challenge that we feel here is basically how to trace the transaction and how to prove, the crypto ownership. Yeah, because the cryptocurrency is by design supposed to maintain its anonymity. Yeah, it's a big task, to discover the real person behind the crypto wallet owner. Yeah, with the current identity hiding techniques, like mixers, privacy protected wallet, enhanced privacy crypto, and this makes the job is more demanding. Yeah, luckily that's why we have Joshua here. Chainalysis, tools, tools like Silo Breaker, CipherTrace. They are all amazing products because they are able to de-anonymize this crypto wallet owner. And other than that, we can see that the challenge is how to preserve, the digital asset. Normally, in normal cases, normal crime cases, the law enforcement agency have a dedicated warehouse or evidence room to store all these confiscated exhibits. But in situation like this, a digital asset or crypto assets, how do we seize or keep all these digital assets? So the situation is different because it involves the devaluation issues. It involves the risk. If someone lose the key or accidentally typing the wrong, recording the wrong key value. So this is like the same, like you destroying or tampering the evidence. Yeah. And as for the analyst to come up with the report, you need to be meticulous. You need to be, the job is very tedious, whereby you need to in order to establish this cryptocurrency ownership, to extract all the relevant information related to the transaction. The crypto address, it has like 34 characters. The transaction ID, they have 64 characters. The private key have 64 characters. And then you need to put all this inside one report. So it's challenging and it's time consuming for the analyst and the technical reviewer to investigate, analyze, produce, and review the report. And lastly, I believe that awareness, the challenge, because most of the people, they don't really much more have understanding about the illegal scam related to cryptocurrency. And as for the investigation officer too, they this is new to them, and then they need to keep up with the technology. In terms of the law, I would say that currently in Malaysia, regulation is clear. The entity related to digital asset regulated by the SC. As for the central bank digital currency, our central bank right now saying that it's not really our priorities. I mean, their priorities to focus on this, just wait and see the development from other countries. So basically, that's the challenge, you know. It's
Yeah.
challenge.
Joshua, I would like to get some of your thoughts on sort of the ransomware threat. I understand Chainalysis collects a lot of data on this. Can you provide some idea of scale?
Sure, Manesh. So I think the interesting thing when it comes to ransomware is that now cryptocurrency is the transaction of choice. Obviously, because it's anonymous, and you can transfer from any wallet across borders without going through a central entity like a bank or a central bank, right? So to a lot of criminals, this is good. It's under the radar. But the thing that works against them is that, cryptocurrency being based on blockchain, every transaction is recorded on a public ledger, right? And so like what Zabri had mentioned, you have wallet addresses, although it's a long string of alphanumeric characters, but they are recorded, right? So what we are seeing today as we analyze these transactions on the blockchain is we are being able to give much more insights to law enforcement, to regulators, to cybersecurity practitioners on the kind of modus operandi of a lot of these ransomware threat actors, right? So, some of the things that we are able to tell them is that, a lot of these different variants are actually launched by the same attacker, because we are seeing funds moving to the same wallets. We are seeing that a lot of these perpetrators are also using common money laundering mechanisms, right? So they will, use certain mixers, they will use certain entities that are providing money laundering for them. So when we kind of trace through the transactions on the blockchain, they kind of converge to certain wallets, and therefore, we can make some deductions on how they are operating. Because ultimately their main goal is to convert that cryptocurrency to cash, right? So with blockchain analytics, we're able to provide this type of insights, and obviously it would help, not just in the post-breach kind of investigations, but as well as the pre-breach, because if we are able to help law enforcement to bring down these money laundering entities, and then it makes it more difficult for them to actually use cryptocurrency as a means and, kind of divert them to other, means of transactions. Yeah.
I mean, ransomware is certainly a very interesting topic. Maybe Guy and Ray both, you might have some thoughts on this you'd like to share. Let's start with you, Guy.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Manesh. I think just to touch on what Joshua talked about, where I think ransomware is really interesting because you've got some case studies like off the back of the Garmin case as an example in terms of the kind of Garmin sports watches. And this is really where I think we start to see the hard end of cyber and traditional financial crime kind of converging. So, I mean, I think it was in October of last year that there was a joint OFAC FinCEN advisory specifically talking to malware ransomware payments to sanctioned entities via intermediaries. So, and this wasn't financial services specific, this was kind of across the board. And I think if you look at the Garmin case, I mean, they actually, they used an intermediary literally called Evil Corp, which is I could think kind of clues in the title, right? Which is a Russian sanctioned entity, to get the decryption key following the Dridex malware infection. So this is, for me, literally where you have cyber meets sanctions. And I think increasingly to Josh's point around, they're using traditional money laundering methods. I think it's important that people listening to this also consider, I think, a few key facts that there is a lot of interoperability between kind of the traditional financial crime team's skill sets and models that you already have. And that now you have this kind of convergence of risk as well. And that this, unfortunately, particularly within cyber, I mean, it's the change of target from the kind of traditional assets, in other words, money, to the criticality of data, right? And how that is now increasingly being targeted, which is whether it's proprietary customer data or whatever, it is quite literally the lifeblood of every single company. So I think that's posing real problems for the community in terms of how they look at, their response to this growing trend that ransomware is becoming so popular.
Thanks, Guy. Ray, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to both Joshua and Guy on this ransomware theme.
Yes, so, a key point to remember is that ransomware is a business case just like any other business. So where we can disrupt that business case and make it more expensive for them to conduct business, they're going to go and look for other things to do. So it's really important that we do push for law enforcement to pursue these guys, that there is a possibility that they might get caught and face justice. It's really important that we do all collaborate so that they're not picking us all off individually, and that we make it as difficult as possible for them to conduct their business, basically by good cyber hygiene and not paying the ransoms, because that, of course, the more ransoms get paid, the more people are encouraged to go into this growing business, if you like. So.
Yeah, and I know obviously there must be some complexity with trying to resolve these cases, and so I'm glad to have Joshua here. I remember, Joshua, you saying before that one of the most important things for you is to solve cases. Can you walk us through this process in terms of what agencies are asking for your help, what steps you walk through to actually solve such a case involving sort of ransomware, cryptocurrency, these types of cases, or any examples you can share as well would be useful.
Sure. I think with blockchain analytics, the key thing is being able to monitor the movements of funds from wallet to wallet. And then ultimately, what we call the place where they off-ramp, right? So off-ramp would be places like exchanges where they go and sell off their Bitcoins. It could be at DeFi, services as well. So what we do is we enable law enforcement to start tracing through the private wallets. So those continue to remain anonymous on our platform. But, we have, through the many years being in business, been able to identify wallets that belong to real life entities. So wallets that belong to exchanges, to mixing services. And so what we do is when we see movement going to these services, that's when law enforcement have the leads, right? So they are able to go to these exchanges and say, well, there's this particular transaction that has its source from a ransomware, right? And we need to know who is that person that has received those funds. And of course, with regulations kicking in, enforcing that exchanges must have proper KYC in place, that's when the exchanges can give law enforcement, customer information, email, photo IDs, right? And these are required for the KYC in the exchanges. So we are able to help law enforcement to do that. Obviously, when it comes to the money laundering side of things, now things can get a little bit sophisticated. We have seen through some research that, we what we call ransomware as a service, right? So you have service providers. Some of them provide bulletproof web hosting services. Some of them just sell the exploitation kits. Some of them sell the DNS resolution domains, things like that. So we will see that the perpetrator actually has to pay off these different parties when they receive funds from a ransomware victim, right? So we can see the percentages that, they are paying 5% to the bulletproof web hosting service. They are paying 10% to, the exploit kits. And so the ability for law enforcement to monitor this service providers and again, bring them down, right? That's what we want to help them to do. Because again, the impact on ransomware, today we just had, a message from CSA, the Cybersecurity Agency, the CEO, David Cole, who is advising against paying the ransomware. So that theme is going to be across, I think, every jurisdiction. The US obviously is leading that case and is, thinking of putting payment to ransomware as part of a sanction or terrorist funding, right? So all really tie it in place. We are just part of the ecosystem providing more visibility into the transactions that happen. Obviously, if it's against the law to pay ransomware, then that's where Chainalysis can come in and also help law enforcement investigate these payments, right, and try to stamp it from the start. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joshua. I know, Guy, we've talked about some of these similar themes before as well. I guess also, I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the main challenges that we need to address as an industry when it comes to cyber, and feel free to move beyond ransomware, cryptocurrency.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think, okay, so I've sort of changed my mind a bit in terms of when we talked about this as a response. So I'd kind of frame this in three key areas. So just looking at the panel that we have here, right, in terms of, if you look at ASEAN as an area, I think one of the key challenges that I noticed that we still need to address is having kind of core regulators and central bankers and other, the entire kind of ecosystem truly understand what this threat looks like. Because like this is not, and I still have these conversations. If you go to kind of some of the more emergent markets, it's truly terrifying what the beliefs are that, if we'd never get hacked, Guy, because I take the power adapter out of the mainframe and I pop it in my briefcase when I go home. Like, it's absolutely crazy. So I think there's a huge challenge we have around education. And I think it's also not to be underestimated. Ray earlier talked about the need to collaborate. And we truly, truly do. And this is not just marketing sort of fluff, because the criminals are collaborating. We've seen increasingly on the dark web, postings that state things like, we've gained access to XYZ institution. Can anyone help me? As an example, one that we would be very focused on. I need help being able to form a Swift MT103. And we increasingly see things like almost do-it-yourself guides to be able to replicate with malware examples of kind of content to put into phishing emails that are topical. I mean, this is increasingly a kind of becoming quite a professional industry, and it's lucrative. And I think one of the concepts that we've started to see is I read in the blog CyberOps late last year, they were tracking a Russian APT called Fin7 that's being described as the Uber of cybercrime. And I think this is a really interesting case because the technology that they're using is not particularly sophisticated. They're not as impressive as Lazarus or APT38 in terms of the types of technology they're using. But what's really interesting is how they're organized. So they talk about having undergone an agile implementation. They have DevOps teams. They have a Jira feedback loop system, as well as a customer-facing help desk. And their product, and this is what's interesting, their product is basically a black box attack methodology that they could sell to other criminal organizations that would look to deploy this in anger. Something that's well managed, supported, is being increasingly developed. It's being run as a business. And so you now have this industry is so profitable. You now have fraud as a service kind of being advertised quite openly. And this to me is I think the huge concern. I think for practitioners trying to defend their institutions, there is still for me huge discussions about technology that need to be resolved, which I think is ironic because if you think back to where kind of cybercrime prevention started, in some cases it was traditionally, in the IT department, and that's not the right skill set. I'm assuming heads of IT are really good at managing a kind of technical roadmap, and buying in the various kind of boxes and pieces of kit that you need. But there's a genuine need, I think, in particular for things like AI and machine learning. I haven't seen these being deployed in the way that we would like, right? To be able to kind of seamlessly detect potential intrusion. So I think these are some of the areas. The technology piece, I think, needs to be explored further for sure. I also think there's a huge need for education in emergent markets, that just because you're not a Singapore or you're not a Hong Kong in terms of the strength of those as financial centers. These banks are still being targeted, are still being hacked. And I'd like to see a lot more institutions like Cybersecurity Malaysia that act as that bridge between kind of private and public sector, because I really think, similar to kind of traditional fin crime, it's a bit of a missing link, really. And that's why I think this is an interesting panel with FS-ISAC that's really trying to pool all of this sort of community intelligence and threat updates so that, everyone is better together. But I genuinely believe this is still, we have a real soft underbelly in Asia Pac of institutions that don't understand what this threat is. They don't understand in terms of supply chain the breadth of the kind of attack surface that they need to be looking at. And I think this is why we're going to continue to see, institutions fall foul to this, whether it's through ransomware, whether it's through spear phishing emails, or kind of personal attacks, impersonating, key members of the C-suite or whatever. And we have had cases where it's been the same institution hacked, a number of times in a 3-week period, very, very recently. So I mean, this is not going away. I think that's the key areas of concern.
Manesh, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Oh, it's not just me. I was sort of like, okay, what's happening?
Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. It's fine.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for that, Guy. I was just trying to say anyway that I've just read a question from the audience, kind of touching on some of the themes. Somebody's asking, how real is the risk of cyber hacking to gain access to client accounts and intersect with other forms of financial crime, such as market manipulation? So I was hoping maybe Ray can answer this, because I also wanted to ask Ray, based on all of this information sharing that you see on a day-to-day basis, what are some of the best practices to guard against some of these risks? And what advice you can give to our listeners to ensure they're taking the necessary steps to protect their institutions as well as their clients? Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a risk, and you definitely need to consider that as part of your cybersecurity strategy. So I give 3 pieces of advice, really. The first would be you're going to need to maintain a minimum level of cyber hygiene, or you're not going to be able to respond to any of these threats. So you're going to need to have an asset inventory. You're going to need to have entitlement management, vulnerability management, technical controls on your endpoints and on your network, incident response processes, and so on. And use a model like NIST or ISO, so that you don't forget anything. So that's first. Second is you need to tailor your controls and your defense posture to the threat landscape that you're facing. So use threat intelligence. So FS-ISAC, for example, our members share with us what they're seeing. And we aggregate that, we anonymize that, and we put that back out to the membership so that members are able to see what their peer organizations are facing, and they're able to set themselves up. They can make sure that they have the defenses in place against campaigns that are currently running. For example, they can make sure that when they do penetration tests, they use realistic scenarios that they might really face. So those 2 things are very important. A third thing now that's very topical is third-party risk. So you really need to don't just think that risk ends within your own systems and perimeter. It's also those subcontractors that you're reliant on to deliver service to your customers. You need to look at the risk with them too. So adopt a zero trust mindset when it comes to those third parties, and try to minimize the amount of exposure you have to third-party processing by the way you structure that. Review the processes, protocols, staff that are required for those third-party interactions. Consider using an independent rating service to come in and assess and later monitor your critical third-party providers. And again, share. I mean, we also share a lot on third-party risk, and when third-party incidents come out, we'll put those out to our membership as well.
Thanks, Ray. I'm noticing we don't have a lot of time left, but I would like to get each of your thoughts on sort of key messages for the industry. Let me start with Zabri. I'd like you to maybe share also with us some of the initiatives underway in Malaysia to combat the cyber threat. And then also, of course, please do share any key messages you have for the industry that you think can help our listeners.
Okay, as for Malaysia, last year, our Central Bank of Malaysia introduced RMIT, Risk Management in Technology. So basically, RMIT, it provides clear guidance for minimum expected standards in cybersecurity and serves to provide a level of confidence within the market, covering everything from data center to the ATM, in which the financial institution in Malaysia must adhere, must comply with this guideline. And also, Central Bank Malaysia right now is working on its FinTip, financial threat intelligence platform to operationalize as soon as possible. This is basically to enhance the fraud alert accuracy and also to calculate or quantify the cost saving of its utilization. You know, like every bank, they have their own FinTip, but the source of the origin of that, you know, can be challenged because by central bank, they wanted all this threat intelligence coming from one source, and then they can distribute it to all banks so that they can do the necessary, and basically to improve the crisis preparedness and response capability, especially you know, in managing the operational risk. And we also have we call Internet Banking Task Force as a communication channel and also knowledge sharing channel at the operational level among the financial institution in Malaysia. So these are the initiatives that Malaysia did to protect our people. You know, as for the advice is basically like Guy said and Ray said, that we need to collaborate. You know, not really on collaborate in terms of, you know, sharing information, but the most important thing is collaborating by reporting any successful attacks, any near success attack or any attempts, so that this information can be shared with other banks, so that they can take this as the information in order to prepare themselves and protect their assets and their systems. So other than that, I think protect your hygiene, the cyber hygiene and best practice. I think that they'll be sufficient.
Mute.
He's mute.
Sorry, Joshua, go ahead. Any messages for our listeners?
Well, I totally agree as a former practitioner about collaboration and education. Maybe one point to note is that, you know, as a former practitioner, it's a very stressful job. And sometimes you can have fatigue because, you know, it seems like every other day there's a new technology, there's a new threat vector, there's a, you know, and you get all this information coming in, and it can be really, really stressful. So I think it's important to surround yourself in a community that is not just trying to sell you something, but, you know, is trying to help solve the problem, right? So collaboration with FS-ISAC, with SWIFT, you know, and all the other companies out there that really look at this problem from a serious angle, right? And of course, communicate with the stakeholders and help them to understand that this is not just a IT or CISO kind of issue, but it's a company-wide issue as well. You know, yeah, that's I mean, education and collaboration, very important.
Thank you. And Guy, what do you see? How does the industry have to develop? What needs to change
I
What are
think
your priorities?
Yeah, I think all of the things that have been said, obviously, but trying to sort of add to that instead of, I think a key area that I would really look at as well is, of course, there's the kind of external perspective, but I think a lot of firms listening, I'd really urge you to have a look internally as well. As I think, the vast majority of data breaches have, whether it's intentional or unintentional, employee involvement. And I think increasingly we're seeing very targeted, whether it's targeted at a specific business or an individual within that business. I think really a fairly cost-effective way of looking to shore up defenses is really looking at your kind of employee engagement with red teaming exercises, ensure that there's a board level mandate, that you conduct internal kind of phishing exercises to see, which employees always click the link they shouldn't be clicking, and really trying to make sure that all of this kind of policy of cyber hygiene is actually understood all the way down through the institution. I think that's really key. And then I would just reinforce a point that was made earlier. Unfortunately, it's not an if, it's usually a when. So I would double down in terms of investment around your kind of disaster recovery protocols. Like, do you have a true data backup center? It sounds obvious, but are you actually backing up data, all the data that you need, particularly in line with some of these kind of ransomware attacks? And what do these protocols look like? And do people who are supposed to do things in a time of crisis understand who they communicate with and what they communicate downwards and across the organization? I think it's an area that tends to get a little bit overlooked. And for me, it's kind of a foundational piece.
Thanks, Guy. And of course, we've heard a common theme about the need for information sharing to combat cyber threats. And I think, Ray, you're best placed to talk about that. I'd like you to have the last word, and then we'll finish up. Go ahead, Ray.
Sure. So we've heard how Guy talked about how the bad actors are sharing on the dark web and the community that they have. And Joshua's talked about joining a community. And I think it's true to say that a problem shared is a problem halved. So do find a sharing organization like, for example, FS-ISAC, and you can share what you're seeing. You can, as you look inwards, as Guy advised, you can get advice from your peers. If an incident is ongoing, you can go out to the rest of the sector and are we the only ones seeing this? Are other people seeing this? If they are, what are they doing about it? What's proving effective? And if we work as a community, if we employ herd defense, then that's going to be much more effective.
Thanks so much, Ray. And with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Guy, Joshua, Ray, and Zabri, for participating in this discussion. To all our listeners, I know we didn't get to cover everything we wanted to, and there are so many questions to ask. Feel free to reach out to our speakers or reach out to Regulation Asia, and we can connect you. Once again, thanks to our speakers. Next up, we have a panel on the convergence of fraud and money laundering.